All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&Done, your guide to one D&D. So today we are finally finishing with the September 2022 playtest options by looking at the Rogue. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on, all those things super important. Let's go. So, the Rogue. Of the classes that we've spoken about thus far, the Rogue is the one with the most history in D&D. In the original version of Dungeons and Dragons, before you got like basic and advanced or first edition, original D&D, Thief was one of the classes. You had the equivalent of the fighter. I can't remember if they were called fighter, if they were something else. You had magic user, and then you had, I think it was either priest or cleric, were your three characters. And then the Greyhawk supplement came out, and that introduced the Thief. In the Thief, they actually, Gygax actually talked about what inspired him to create the Thief, along with Gary Schweitzer. Is apparently someone else that's involved with this. But anyway, so he was inspired by characters like Bilbo Baggins from The Hobbit, and then Fritz Leiber's The Grey Mouser, Jack Vance's, I'm going to mispronounce this, Cugil the Clever, from, what was that? That's the, what is it, the Dying Earth series? They had this idea of this kind of, roguish, sneaky kind of character that you couldn't really do thus far, and thus the Rogue was born. The Rogue has always had two things that it has always been able to do, and it's always been able to do well. That is, they could pick locks and disarm traps. Funny thing about that is, as much as the quote-unquote do well, early versions of the Rogue actually couldn't do that well. They were just the only class that could attempt it. Other classes just simply didn't have it. But old school Rogues, you actually had to put points into your disable trap or move silently, and it used a D100 to do it. And at level 1, you had like a 10 to 20% chance of ever succeeding on things like that. So it wasn't until you got to like level 9 or to 10 that you could even do that. But they were still the only class that could even attempt it. The other thing they're really good is what used to be called backstabbing and is now called sneak attacking. They would have the ability where if the enemy was distracted or they didn't know what they were seeing, the Rogue could do extra damage. Fast forward through the versions, one of the things that eventually fell off was Rogues used to have the ability to use magic items, whereas that is normally exclusive to magic users or spellcasters in general. Rogues could do things like cast spells from scrolls or cast or use wands and the things like that. The limitation being they would have a failure chance, so they would have to roll to make it work, whereas a magic user or later on wizards and sorcerers and things like that would just be able to use it. But Rogues could just do it. And so that was something that's kind of gone by the wayside, especially in 5th edition, where you actually have a magic using Rogue now that use magical device just really isn't a the thing anymore. But how does that translate into the 1D&D version of the Rogue? Well, I'm glad you asked me. Let's dive into the actual Rogue itself. So, First thing, creating rogue. Class group expert, primary ability, dexterity. One of the things that has always been nice about rogues is, for the most part, rogues really only need dexterity. If you look in previous editions, because most of their damage was done through their sneak attack or their backstab, it didn't really matter if they had a high strength score to add to their weapon attacks, and they weren't really getting multiple attacks or anything like that. They would do one real big attack, sometimes maybe two, but sneak attack tended to have limitations on it. So even early versions of the rogue, you really only ever needed your dexterity score and maybe a high wisdom or intelligence if you wanted to find the traps yourself. And in 5th edition, the rogue needs nothing else. They can, as long as you're using a finesse weapon, both their attack and damage rolls are going to be their dexterity. All their class abilities use their dexterity. There's a ton of dexterity-based skills that they can specialize in. Stealth, sleight of hand. Their thieves' tools are all dexterity based. Acrobatics is another one that they use a lot. So rogues are really nice in that you really only need one good stat, and everything else can be kind of mediocre, and you can still do really well. It's one of the nice things in 5th edition because rogues in general can start playing around with feats a lot faster than other classes, where other classes at 4th level may want to increase their ability score so that their primary ability score so that they can hit more, or that their spell saves get higher, things like that. Rogues, for the most part, they can do so much because it's just one attack that they need, and they have a bunch of different ways to make sure that they get that attack. They can be a really, really interesting class. So mentioning that, yes, primary ability, dexterity, compared to the other classes we've talked about, where it's like, well, yeah, you could also use this, you could also use this. No, rogues can live entirely. You could have 10s and everything and a 20 in a dexterity and still play a really solid rogue. Going further, creating a rogue. Hit dice 1d8 again. Fun fact: the original flavor of the rogue in original D&D had a hit die of a d4. They were super squishy. When it got to 1st edition, they eventually upgraded to a d6, but they've never had massive amounts of hit points. But the fun thing about early versions of rogue was in original D&D and D&D for 1st edition. Can't remember if it was this way in 2nd edition or not. Different classes leveled up at different rates, and rogues had the smallest amount of experience needed to get to their next level. So rogues could level up like a fiend. They would get to level 4 or 5 while the rest of the party was still sitting at level 2. That is not a thing anymore, and to be perfectly honest, I'm happy about that. It was never super fun to have different level characters just based on the classes they chose, but that was a thing earlier. Proficiency, saving throws, dex and intelligence. Skills, again, they choose the skills for you: acrobatics, investigation, sleight of hand, and stealth. Interesting thing about this, rogues get 4 skills. The other 2 classes we've talked about only got 3. Well, let me look at the bard real quick, because I thought the bard got... did the bard get 4? No, bard only got 3. So that was another thing that was kind of, I guess, interesting about the rogue, specifically in 3rd edition. Rogues, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time since I built a rogue, but if I remember correctly, in 3rd edition, the number of skill points you got at 1st level, and then every time you leveled up, was based on your intelligence score, except for a few classes. And if I remember correctly, rogue was one of those classes where theirs were based on their, I want to say, their dexterity score. And so rogues could ignore intelligence in third edition, whereas every other class, if you wanted to be able to do something outside of combat and sometimes inside of combat, you needed to put at least a little bit into intelligence, because that was really, really important for you to just have at least a few skills. So the fact that they get more skills, and I think that's true in D&D 5th edition as well. Yeah, they get 4 skills in 5th edition. That may be a kind of a callback to the 3rd edition of, well, they generally had... in 3rd edition, you effectively got 4 skill points per... I think it was 4 skill points per... intelligence point above 10 or something like that. It's crazy. And basically, what that turned into is when you first built your character at level 1, you could put 4 points into any skill maximum at first level. So the most you could add to a skill was 4. So basically, you would generally have your skill points be in multiples of 4 when you hit... when you created your character in the 3rd edition. So if you had 8 skill points, well, that meant you could have 2 skills that you were trained in. You theoretically could put 1 point in 8 different skills, but the way 3rd edition worked is if you didn't specialize, if you didn't put all of your points into a skill, it was generally pretty worthless within a level or 2. So 3rd edition was all about specialization, and so you would look at, I have 12 skill points. That means I can have 3 skills. I have 16. That means 4. Back when I used to play 3rd edition based computer games, rogues would always have like 20, 24 skill points, and you would just watch them just have this load of different skills. Now, that was balanced out by the fact that in 3rd edition you had 1 skill for disabling traps. You had a different skill for opening locks. You had a different skill. You had both move silently and the hide skill. So in order to be stealthy, you had 2 different skills that you needed to roll in order to be stealthy. And you had 2 different things you needed to do your thieving type stuff. 5th edition, hiding stuff is all done with your stealth. Any kind of thieving, trapping, anything like that is all done with thieves tools checks. So significantly more simple. But yeah, weapons, they get simple weapons and Martian weapons that have the finesse property, which is nice, which means you can actually be a rapier rogue, which I like. I think they're cool. And then tools, they get thieves tools, obviously. Armor training, they get light armor. All of this pretty basic. As far as starting equipment, they get 20 arrows, a short bow, a burglar's pack, a short sword, 2 daggers, thieves tools, leather armor, 18 gold, and a quiver. None of this is super surprising. None of this is super strange. The only thing I'm kind of less than thrilled about, again, in 5th edition, your equipment, you could choose a rapier or a short sword. Something about 5th edition rogues in general is they don't tend to dual wield a whole lot because you are limited to 1 sneak attack per turn. So dual wielding isn't going to get you the extra damage, and almost all your damage is done through sneak attack. The second reason being, in regular 5th edition, your bonus actions, which you use to 2-weapon fight, and rogues have Cunning Action for their 2-weapon fighting. So wasting your bonus action on just getting another hit that's generally not going to do a ton of damage tends to be a lot less useful than all the different things you get to do with your Cunning Action. So yeah, being able to start off with a rapier and just be a rapier rogue is really cool. Whereas in 1 D&D, you have to start off, you get the short sword first. You don't get to have the bigger hit die or anything like that. You have to start with a short sword. And that's really the only difference between a short sword and a rapier, is a short sword has a d6 damage die and a rapier has a d8 damage die. Otherwise, the properties are the same. Everything about them is the same. Sorry, I have something on my glasses. And then they get fogged up because, yeah. Much better. So, yeah, that's... again, they do these weird things in 1D&D where it seems like they're limiting the classes for no other reason than... For this one just doesn't make sense, because it isn't even that, well, you don't have proficiency in it or anything, or it makes you overpowered. It doesn't. It is literally average damage. You're looking at one additional point of damage. And again, the majority of damage that you're going to get as a rogue is going to be from your sneak attack. It's not going to be from your weapons. It really doesn't matter that you have a rapier instead. So again, it's another one of those things that just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Yeah. So yeah, that's the creating a rogue. Moving on. At first level, the first thing you get is expertise. We've talked about this 3 times now. It's expertise. It works the exact same way as it has in every other video. Basically, you gain expertise in 2 skills proficiencies of your choice. Sleight of hand and stealth are iconic choices for a rogue if you have proficiency in them. So it's the same thing as before. They tell you what skills you're supposed to take, but then say, well, if you want to be a rebel, you can do this, but this is what you're supposed to do. And then for expertise, they go, by the way, when you take this stuff that we tell you to take, you can also take these 2 as expertise. Pretty simple. Moving forward. The big change, and I'm going to drink before this because this is going to be a long one. The big change to the rogue in 1D&D comes at the next feature, which is sneak attack. Like I said, sneak attack, or backstab as it used to be called, is not only is a defining feature of the rogue, but it is the defining feature of the rogue going all the way back to the 70s. Rogues have always been able to backstab. That is their big thing. That is where the primary source of their damage comes from in D&D 5th edition. And one of the things that makes them so deadly, and I've said this many, many times on D&D Deep Dive, is rogues are just this far away from being broken. Because they have so many different things that they can do really, really well with expertise and reliable talent, and sneak attack and cunning action to be able to disengage. They are remarkably difficult to kill. They get evasion. They get I can't remember what it's called. They can have damage, and I can't remember what it's called, but they had a thing that allowed them to have damage. They're just really, really good classes. And one of the things with how critical hits work in 5th edition is you double the number of dice you would roll if you get a crit. Well, because sneak attack is done with dice, that meant anytime a sneak attack got a crit, they would do crap tons of damage. High-level rogues could roll 10 or 20 d6 of damage on a single attack, depending on what specific level they are, because their sneak attack goes up with their rogue levels. And that's the biggest change, and they do it in a really unique way. So let's actually read the sneak attack. You know how to turn a subtle... Try that again. You know how to turn a subtle attack into a deadly one. Once on each of your turns, when you take the attack action, you can deal extra damage to one creature you hit with an attack roll if you're attacking with a finesse weapon or a ranged weapon, and if at least one of the following requirements is met. 1, advantage, you have advantage on the attack roll, or 2, ally adjacent to the target. At least one of your allies is within 5 feet of the target, the ally isn't incapacitated, and you don't have disadvantage on the attack roll. So those are the 2 things that you need for sneak attack. Either you need advantage, or you need an ally next to him that's not that's actually able to attack them, and you can't have disadvantage on the roll. That's really important. To determine the extra damage, roll a number of d6s equal to half your rogue level, round up, and add the dice together. The rogue table shows the number of sneak attack dice you get at each rogue level. The extra damage's type is the same as the weapon's damage type. So that one paragraph massively changes it. And this is how it does it. So, again, the critical hit rules, which is what they're using for this playtest. Again, the last playtest packet they did in August, people freaked out because, they broke critical hits and they're never going to be the same again. And they threw that all away because people made a huge uproar about it. So, again, this is just playtest material. But this is how this is different. Instead of, and I'll read the sneak attack for Rogues in 5th edition. Once per turn, you can deal an extra 1d6 damage to one creature you hit with an attack if you had advantage on the attack roll. The attack must use a finesse or ranged weapon. You don't need advantage on the attack roll if another enemy of the target is within 5 feet of it. That enemy isn't incapacitated and you don't have disadvantage on the attack roll. The amount of extra damage increases. So, what it says is once per turn, you can deal an extra 1d6 damage. This one is, you can deal extra damage to one creature you hit with an attack roll. To determine the extra damage, roll a number of d6s equal to half your rogue level, round up, and add the dice together. So the sneak attack damage is separate from your attack damage. They have changed it from add extra die to your damage to you are getting a flat bonus to damage. And flat numbers don't get doubled for critical hits. So because they said to determine the extra damage, roll a number of d6s equal to half your rogue level and add the dice together, instead of add a number of dice equal to half your rogue level rounded up to the damage, rogues no longer get to double their sneak attack damage, which massively changes how the character plays. Something, and I've told this story before in D&D deep dives and on podcasts and a bunch of other places. One of the really, really popular things in early Adventurers League for the 5th edition, which anyone that doesn't know, I was a local coordinator for the Adventurers League. I used to do the convention circuit here in Wisconsin. I actually used to run all of I was in charge of all of the organized play games at one of the local conventions. So it was Adventurers League, Pathfinder Society, Shadowrun missions. All the people that ran that answered to me. And I had something like 2,000 hours worth of experience running this stuff because I did it so much at conventions, and I ran my own games, and I ran games at local game stores, and I ran their programs at a couple different stores. Like, I did a lot. So in the early days of the Adventurers League, the first couple years, a super, super common thing to see constantly, especially in low-level games, is what I called the Peekaboo Rogue. Peekaboo Rogue is really, really simple. It is a halfling rogue. If I remember correctly, it's the Lightfoot halfling rogue. Because Lightfoot halflings could use a creature, a medium-sized creature, as cover to attempt to hide. And so the way this would work is they would use either a crossbow or a shortbow. Shortbow was significantly more common. But crossbow sometimes happened as well. And what they would do is they would have a medium-sized creature fighting an enemy. They would get directly behind the medium-sized creature, say, well, because I'm a Lightfoot halfling, I can hide behind them. So they would use their Cunning Action to hide, and then they would attack, and they would claim that because they were hiding, that meant that they got advantage on the attack roll. And it effectively meant that Peekaboo Rogues never made an attack without advantage. every single time that they made an attack, they were always at advantage. And I had a really, really simple way to deal with that, that dealt with the idea of object permanence and the wording of how attacking from stealth is actually supposed to work in D&D and not how these people interpreted it. But it was really, really common. And even when I would crack down on that, and once people stopped doing it because all of 5th edition finally realized, no, that's massively broken and stupid. Rogues would do everything they could to get advantage on attack rolls. And there's a bunch of different ways that rogues can get advantage on attack rolls. To the point that in Tasha's Culture of Everything, they even gave an optional feature where they could use their bonus action to aim and get advantage on attack rolls. The reason why was not because it was so hard to hit as a rogue. Again, rogues only needed one stat. They didn't miss that often. No, the reason why was because if they crit, they could outdamage every other person at the table by a significant margin. The higher they got, the more deadly they were. They could one-shot dragons. They were that powerful. And that was one of the reasons why I would crack down on things like the Peekaboo Rogue. Because I'm like, you know what? You really don't... You're already a really solid class. Again, Rogue is that close to being broken. So it's already a really solid class. You don't need advantage on every single attack. You just don't. And there's tons of different ways to get advantage. If you want to be creative, like if you want to go into the bushes and hide there and shoot from there, I will give you that once. And then if you want to be hidden again, you need to move somewhere else because surprisingly enough, a person whose life is dependent on them being able to defend themselves in combat is going to understand that when they get shot from that one bush and they see you, because as soon as you hit them, you are no longer hidden. So they see you in that bush. They're going to expect you to shoot them again. So they're not going to be surprised the second, third, or seventh time you shoot from the exact same place without moving. Yeah, this changed to sneak attack. The other thing that's interesting about this is once on each of your turns. If we go back to sneak attack in 5th edition, once per turn is what they said. And so an interesting thing that rogues got real savvy about real quick was because it's once per turn, you can only get one sneak attack on your turn. But as soon as your turn was over, you theoretically, if you could get another attack somehow, you could sneak attack again. So what was really, really common was players would figure out how to give the rogue opportunity attacks. If you had something like a battle master fighter, they could just give them an attack and they'd use their reaction to make an attack. Otherwise, things that would cause enemies to provoke attack of opportunities. Things like fear effects that cause them to run away. Well, running is not forced movement. Despite the fact that you're running because you're afraid, that still triggers opportunity attacks. And that became another way that rogues would really start out-damaging people because they could get sneak attack twice per round effectively because for the most part, to attack when it's not your turn, you needed to use your reaction. And rogues really didn't have a use for their reaction, so it was a perfect way to do it. Now, they have kiboshed both of those. Just completely squashed them. You cannot get crit damage on sneak attacks, and you cannot sneak attack when it's not your turn. You only get it on your turn. That is a really, really big deal, and it massively changes how you play the rogue. It also massively changes how the rest of the party plays the rogue. Now, I've said many times before, and I've said many times in this video, rogues are this close to being broken in 5th edition. Does that mean I think they needed to nerf sneak attack? Absolutely not. This is something that, again, feels... This is just my personal opinion. I do not know anyone at Wizards of the Coast. I do not talk to any of them. I have met Chris Perkins, I think 2 or 3 times. He's a lovely gentleman. But this is not me saying anything about them. But what this feels like is the initial intention of sneak attack in 5th edition and the crit rules in 5th edition. I don't think they ever intended sneak attack to be doubled on a critical hit, because again, rogues already do an impressive amount of damage without getting critical hits. So I think the original intention with sneak attack, first of all, was not meant to get crit damage, and I don't think it was meant to be able to be used as part of a reaction or something on someone else's turn. However, if they released an errata, by the time they realized that people were doing this, if they released an errata that changed it in 5th edition, people would riot, because rogues were a really, really popular class. So it feels like, again, 1D&D is them going, no, this is what we intended. We don't like the way that you guys are playing, so now we're going to force you to play the way that we want you to. And so this is them, because it's a new version, this is them changing it so it's like, no, you don't get crit damage on sneak attack. No, you don't get to sneak attack twice per round. You're not supposed to do that. Rogues are only supposed to attack once, and then they're supposed to run away like little bitches. That's what rogues do. Bards aren't cool. Stop making them cool. Rogues aren't super damage dealers. They're sneaky people that poke people and then run away. That's how you're supposed to play the rogue. Forget this dagger shit in teleportation and becoming a paladin. Nobody gets that reference. Go watch Critical Role Season 1. Or Campaign 1. So yeah, again, this just really, really, this feels overly like a massive overcorrection. Yes, were crits on sneak attacks really, really devastating? Absolutely. And I knew a few dungeon masters that didn't like rogues at their tables because of this, especially for mid to high level play. They really didn't like high level rogues because they could break encounters really, really quickly just because they got a nat 20 when you weren't suspecting it. That being said, this is such a nerf. This is such a limitation on it that it almost makes it feel like playing a rogue isn't going to be fun anymore. Yes, you still get to do more damage in a single hit than any other class. However, a lot of other classes get really cool shit, like spellcasters. Spellcasters can do more damage than a sneak attack. And they can do it to a lot of different people. The difference being they have to burn spell slots in order to do that, whereas rogues can just do it all the time. So yes, rogues should have some limitations. This feels entirely too much, especially the part about once on each of your turns. Because that was one thing I liked about sneak attack, is if you really wanted to get the most out of your rogue, you needed to work with the rest of your party. Because there was no way a rogue could force an enemy to provoke an opportunity attack from them. There just wasn't a way for it to do it. They had to rely on someone else in the party. But once they did, when they got that rhythm down, whether it was using fear, whether it was your battle master giving attacks out, whatever way they figured out to give rogues the ability to get their extra sneak attack in, it was really cool. It was really interesting. And this just... this feels way, way too much of a correction. And as we go through the rest of the rogue, like... I personally have not built and played a rogue in D&D 5th edition. I've played almost every other class, but rogue isn't one of them. And one of the reasons I haven't is my Shadow Monk was effectively a rogue. Because I took the criminal background, I got proficiency in Thieves' Tools. Monks are dex-based already. And because of crazy monk shit, I could do what most rogues could do. There was even one time when I was playing my, it was it was a late tier 3 game. And there was another rogue, there was actual rogue in the party. And so, this rogue and I would basically kind of compete throughout this thing to see who could be the real rogue. And my monk could outrogue the rogue. Mostly because I knew how to play my monk really, really well, and Shadow Step is super, super great. And so the rogue's like, ha, I'm fast. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm a monk. I can run circles around you and then teleport. Oh, well, I can dash as a bonus action. I can teleport 60 feet. My teleport is bigger than your dash. And that's just my bonus action. And then, yeah, he tried to steal some stuff and I caught him doing it. And it was actually a lot of fun. But yeah, so I haven't played a rogue in 5th edition, but looking over the rogue class in 5th edition and now looking over the 1D&D version, the rogue seems really boring to me. And the 1D&D version of it seems extra boring. The flavor and the fun for most rogues comes from their subclass in 5th edition. Because the main aspect of the rogue in 5th edition, like, what you do everything is you find a target, you sneak attack them. You wait until your next turn to find a target and sneak attack them. Like, that's how you play a rogue. It's a very, very simple thing to do. It's not an extremely complicated class. Like I said, the thing that got complex about it was trying to find ways to get that extra sneak attack and then outside of combat stuff. But the rogue here is just, because you no longer get to double your damage, and, you know, obviously trying to find ways to get advantage so you could get a better chance of critting, that was part of what made the rogue fun. Now both of those things have been taken away, so now the rogue is literally, I go in, I stab, I run away. And that's all you do. And it seems really, really weak. Anyway, yeah, so that's sneak attack. Moving on. The final thing you get at first level is Thieves Cant. If you've watched my D&D deep dive on the rogue, I love Thieves Cant. I think Thieves Cant is super, super cool. They have changed Thieves Cant in 1D&D to where Thieves Cant is an actual language. In 5th edition, Thieves Cant isn't a language, and the idea that you can't learn it. The only way you can get Thieves Cant is if you take a level of rogue. And I like that. I thought it was really, really cool that rogues have their own secret language that only rogues can know. And, like, the idea behind Thieves Cant is really, really cool. I'm not a fan of them turning into a language that anyone can get. I think the urchin... the urchin background gets sign language. Maybe it's the criminal background in this. One of them gets it. Gets Thieves Cant, and I'm massively against that. I do not think Thieves Cant should be anything you can get from a background. I don't think you should be able to get it from a feat. I think you need to be a rogue to get it. Yeah. Otherwise, it's Thieves Cant. It's a special language that only rogues speak, yeah, it's super cool and fun. Moving on. At 2nd level, you get Cunning Action. Identical to Cunning Action from 5th edition. On your turn, you can take one of the following actions as a bonus action: dash, disengage, or hide. Now, interesting thing about this, this is one of the few classes we've seen thus far that has a use for their bonus action. Again, in regular 5th edition, every character in the game can 2-weapon fight as a bonus action. Every character in the game is proficient in daggers. So theoretically, every single character has a use for their bonus action. In 1D&D, that isn't the case. There isn't a default bonus action ability that every character can do, as far as we can see. So having something that you can use your bonus action for, action economy-wise, is really important. The 3 things you can do as Cunning Action: dash, extra movement is always useful. Disengage, great for that hit and run kind of thing. Which means, especially if you are playing, really both, if you're a ranged rogue or a melee rogue, both of them get advantages from disengage. Basically, the melee rogue goes in and then stabs them and then disengages so that they can't get attacked. And because they're generally going to be attacking someone that has one of their allies next to them, they're not going to have to worry about the dude coming after them, because in order to come after them, they have to run away from their ally. And that provokes opportunity attacks and things like that. So didn't generally happen. Then the final thing, hide. Hide is what I see most rogues use. It is massively overutilized. Like I said, the Peekaboo rogue loved to do this, but it's a really useful ability as well. Even without the Peekaboo rogue aspect of it, the fact that hiding means that you have effectively broken line of sight with enemies is a really big deal. Spells that require line of sight can't target you. That's a really big thing. People can't shoot at you if they can't see you. Doesn't mean that you're magically invisible or anything like that. It just means that there are a lot of mechanical benefits to hiding beyond I'm invisible and I can kill anyone from here and no one will ever know that I am here, despite the fact that I spent the last 3 turns sitting in the exact same place going peekaboo, shooty shoot. So yeah, Cunning Action. Moving on. 3rd level, choose your subclass. The Thief subclass is what's in here. The Thief, again, go back to original Dungeons and Dragons. That's what the rogue was the Thief. It is the first subclass in the PHB. It's the only subclass in the system's reference document. Who would have thought? We'll go over that in the at the end here. 4th level, you get a feat. Same thing we've talked about. 5th level, however, you get Uncanny Dodge. That was the word I was looking for. And this one is a little bit different, if I remember correctly. Depending on how it was interpreted. So here, for 5th level Uncanny Dodge, when an attacker that you can see hits you with an attack roll, you can use your reaction to have the attack's damage against you round down. So the 5th edition version of this is starting at 5th level. When an attacker that you can see hits you with an attack, you can use your reaction to have the attack's damage against you. Because it says when an attacker hits you with an attack and doesn't specifically mention an attack roll, I know a lot of rogues that would use Uncanny Dodge for things like, well, I failed my dex save for Fireball, so I'm going to Uncanny Dodge the Fireball. And that is, depending on how you interpret with an attack, because an attack has been defined in 5th edition as something that requires an attack roll, but it's also like for invisibility. You know, making an attack can break your invisibility, and so casting a spell that requires a saving throw for them still counts as an attack. You're still doing something aggressive. In 1D&D, they change it. No, it has to be something with an attack roll. You have to be able to see it. And you have to be able to see the attacker specifically. But then, you know, that's a use of your reaction. And it's a really useful ability, to be perfectly honest. But again, this kind of feeds into my theory that 1D&D is like, okay, we can't change 5th edition because too many people play it this way. And if we change it, people are going to get pissed off. But now that we get to make our rules all over again, we're going to reword everything so that it only works the way that we want it to. Which again, I completely understand that. I'm a platinum bestseller. I'm a platinum bestseller, a silver bestseller, and a copper bestseller on the DM's Guild. I understand completely changing wordings and things like that to make sure that your intention and how it was supposed to be used is followed by how you by the wording that you use. I talk all the time about the idea of you choose your words carefully. So I can totally understand them changing things because this is the way it was intended. But just because that's the way it was intended doesn't mean that the way that people interpreting it is wrong or is bad in some way. If it's breaking the game, yeah, change it. But it wasn't. Again, with what we talked about with the sneak attack being activated on a reaction, Uncanny Dodge meant that, well, I could do Uncanny Dodge, but it means I don't get a reaction for the rest of the turn, meaning I miss out on my sneak attack, which is the big thing that I do super well. So there were already limitations on Uncanny Dodge. Now that they've taken that away, Uncanny Dodge becomes significantly more useful. And so, yeah, I guess I can understand them trying to limit it, but they're still going to be using it almost every turn. It's not like you're ever going to come up against a combat that is exclusively spellcasters. They would all die. They're going to be hit by things, and even spellcasters have attack rolls that they make. Disintegrate is an attack roll. Firebolt is an attack roll. Scorching Ray is an attack roll. There's plenty of things that attack rolls. Does mean that they can't half the damage from magic missiles. But it also would be kind of a waste because you'd only be able to have the damage from one missile, not the whole thing. So, anyway. So, yeah, again, a lot of these changes are definitely trying to limit the rogue, and I just don't understand why. Like I said, the rogue was this close to being broken, but it wasn't broken. It was this close, but it wasn't. And so a lot of these, again, this feels like an overcorrection based on some, again, I remember hearing Dungeon Masters just get really, really upset that rogues can have all the damage every time and they're impossible to kill. Well, they're not. You just have to understand how to make interesting combat encounters. If every combat encounter as a DM, if every single combat encounter you make is my big pile of hit points needs to make your big pile of hit points go to 0. If that is the only goal of every one of your combat encounters, you are a boring dungeon master. The lose condition cannot always be you all die. It can't. It's massively boring. Especially the higher the level you go, the less a deal the less a deal breaker it is for someone to die. Starting at 5th level, you get Revivify for the Divine Spellcasters. So if somebody dies, they can revivify them up. As soon as you get what is it? I think it's either 7th or 10th level. You start getting access to Resurrection and a bunch of other things that keep people there. Yeah, like getting mad that you can't dwindle their hit points as fast as you want to is really dumb. Create more interesting combat encounters. Create encounters where it doesn't matter how much damage they take. This ceiling is falling on them as they go. So it doesn't matter if they kill every single bad guy in the combat. They're still going to die at the end because they're going to be crushed. Or if they don't kill them in enough time, or if they don't stop the spellcasters enough time, they cast a spell that causes a town to be sacrificed or something. You know, make real consequences other than, oh, you're dead, roll a new character. So, yeah, moving on. 6th level subclass feature. 7th level expertise. Again, you get 2 more expertise. 8th level, you get a feat. 9th level, you get evasion. And this works identically to how it works for the 5th edition rogue. The big difference being 5th edition rogues get it at 7th level. 1 D&D rogues get it at 9th level. Which kind of sucks. But evasion, you can nimbly dodge out of the way of certain dangers when you're subjected to an effect that allows you to make a dexterity saving throw to take only half damage. You instead take no damage if you succeed on the saving throw, and only half damage if you fail. You can't use this feature if you're incapacitated. Evasion is massively useful. A bunch of different classes get it, but rogues got it first for the most part. Rangers could get it, I believe, level 9 or level 11 or 13. If they were hunters, monks got evasion at level 9, but rogues got it at 7, and it was really, really useful. Again, especially since it's based on dexterity saving throws. Rogues are dexterity-based classes. They get proficiency in dexterity saving throws. It meant that spells, specifically things like Fireball, Lightning Bolt, those classic spells that are super fun to throw at your players, they could, with a high enough dexterity score and a high enough save, they could get out of most of the damage from it. It made them very, very tough, which was almost essential for melee rogues. They were going to be getting in, down and dirty with the enemies. They were going to be getting really, really close. And they don't have massive hit dice. They don't generally have massive ACs, though with the fact that their dexterity score is so high and they use light armor, they tend to have better ACs than most spellcasters. And can actually get higher ACs than some like plate-wearing classes and things like that, depending on how things are built and what magic items you find. So, yeah. Other than that, it's evasion. It is a very, very useful thing. But again, this is something that's mostly an autopilot kind of thing. You don't choose to use evasion. Evasion just happens. Uncanny Dodge, you do have to choose to use. Everything else in here, it just kind of happens while you're playing the character. Which is a theme that I've seen with a lot of 1D&D, is the features from your character itself are mostly autopilot kind of things. Bigger numbers, bigger dice, stuff like that. There's not a lot of choice built into any of these three classes, which I'm not a huge fan of. It's one of the reasons I like playing monks, is they have a lot of different things they can do, and so the fun part of playing a monk is going, okay, am I going to patient defense this turn and try and get people to try and punch me so that they waste their attacks? Am I going to stun people? It's just, yeah. Moving on. Don't worry, I have another bottle. So, damn you. Alright. So, 10th level, get a feat. Why are they getting a feat at 10th level? That's weird. Hold on. I want to make sure I'm not understanding how stuff works. 8th level, get a feat. 10th level is a subclass feature. When we go to the Bard, 10th level is a subclass feature. Why does the Rogue... I literally just figured this out as I'm doing this right now. The Rogue gets an extra feat at 10th level, which is weird. 3rd edition, certain classes would get additional feats. I think Rogues might have been one of them. No, I don't think they did. I know Artificers could get additional feats, but they... anytime you got additional feats, Fighters are the ones that got the most of them. Anytime you got additional feats, they generally had to be from a subset where they were called class feats or something like that. You could take those feats anytime, but whenever you got a bonus fighter feat, you had to take one of these fighter class feats. Same with the monk. The monk got a bunch of specifically monk feats that they could take. So yeah, it's weird that the rogue just gets an extra feat instead of having... And they get an ability at 10th level. That is super weird. They get both a feat and a 10th level subclass feature. I don't know why that is. So that makes it interesting. Maybe this is why they nerfed everything else, because they're giving them an extra feat. But again, one of the defining features of the fighter in 5th edition is they get more feats than anyone else. So if you're going to take that away from the fighter, the only thing the fighter has left is they make more attacks than everyone else, and that gets really boring really fast. So, that's interesting. Moving on. Not sure how I feel about that. At 11th level, you get Reliable Talent. Works almost identically to how it works in 5th edition. Whenever you make an ability check that uses one of your skill or tool proficiencies, you can treat a d20 roll of 9 or lower as a 10. Basically, anything you are trained in, anything you're proficient in, your bottom roll is a 10. That also means rogues cannot roll nat 1s on ability checks. Now, this is only ability checks. It's not attack rolls, saving throws, anything like that. It's just ability checks. But it means that they cannot roll a nat 1 on them. They will always roll, bare minimum, a 10. Which means if a rogue has expertise in stealth and they have a 5 in their dexterity, 5 for their dexterity modifier, and let's say at 11th level you're going to have a plus 4 to your, is that right? Before I say the wrong thing. 11th, yeah, plus 4 to your proficiency bonus. So that's 5 and 4 is 9 for that, but you double the proficiency bonus. You add another 4 into that. Means they have a plus 13. Means the lowest a rogue can roll for a stealth check to hide is a 23. You see why rogues are just that close to being broken? Yeah, in order to not be tricked by that, you have to, because stealth checks are made against passive perception. That means you have to have a passive perception of 23 or higher, which is really hard. There's you don't make contested checks on stealth or anything like that. It's always done, rules as written, it's always done by passive passive perception. So you need a plus 13 to be able to see a rogue. Nuts. Moving on. 12th level, you get a feat. 13th level, you get subtle strikes. You have advantage on any attack roll that targets a creature that is within 5 feet of at least one of your allies who isn't incapacitated. You see why they don't need to be able to hide all the time? Because at 13th level, they just get advantage all the time. Now, this is not anywhere near as big a deal as it was when sneak attacks could crit. But I want to see if they actually had. And they didn't have that in, in 5th edition, they didn't have this automatically gets advantage to the thing. I think one of the subclasses had something similar to this, but it was not a base rogue thing. And again, this just kind of goes back into that idea of they're taking away less, like you have less choices that you can make. Subtle strike, now you don't have to try and get advantage, you just always get advantage. You don't have to be creative, you don't have to try and make your stealth check or move around or anything. We're going to just give you advantage. Which again, I've already mentioned, there was a lot of different ways that rogues could get advantage anyways. This, to me, just sounds like they're going, you know what, they're going to have advantage anyway. Let's just put it into the class and make it so that, DMs like this dude can't get annoyed when they're always getting advantage. By the way, I wasn't annoyed when rogues got advantage. I was annoyed when they did stupid things to get the advantage because there were so many other ways they could get it. I'd be like, no, dude, seriously, there's like 7 ways you can get advantage, and you're going to play peekaboo. That's how you want to do it. It's just insulting to me now. Like, at least pretend to be in this game. So yeah, that's a weird one. With how much they nerfed the rogue, now just giving them advantage on anything. Again, advantage isn't nearly as big a deal for them because now their crits are shit. Moving on. 14th level subclass feature. 15th level Slippery Mind. You get proficiency in wisdom and charisma saving throws. That means you now have proficiency in dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Which is basically almost everything you're going to be making saving throws against spells for. The only thing that is not covered is Constitution, which is generally cold or poison spells. So the only thing that is worrying to a rogue is poison and cold. Everything else, they do really well saving. And again, evasion is only for dexterity saving throws. And uncanny dodge now only works on attack rolls. So getting that additional stuff for Slippery Mind is actually really useful now. Whereas before, I was like, well, even if I can just uncanny dodge it, and I'll be fine. So, yeah. Moving on. 16th level feat, 17th level elusive. No attack roll has advantage against you while you aren't incapacitated. This is another thing taken directly from 5th edition. Only in 5th edition it was their 18th level of ability. And again, it's really, really useful. It means enemies are not going to get that advantage ability, that extra chance to crit. And any attack roll against you, you can uncanny dodge to have the damage even more. So the likelihood of rogues getting blindsided by anything is relatively low. Give them a weapon of warning and they are perfect. 18th level, Stroke of Luck. This is a modified version of the 20th level ability of the Rogue in 5th edition. And again, they changed things in 1D&D where your ultimate ability in 1D&D is given to you at your 18th level, so that 19th level you can take a feat and 20th you can take an epic boon. Not a huge fan of that, but Stroke of Luck, they do make some changes to it. If you fail a D20 test, you can turn the roll into a 20. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. If we compare that to what it was in 5th edition, if your attack misses a target within range, you can turn the miss into a hit. Alternatively, if you fail an ability check, you can treat the D20 roll as a 20. So the reason that they had to make that change was because if you could make an attack roll into a 20, that means it's a critical hit, and rogues getting a guaranteed crit at 18th level or 20th level was devastating. Again, at 20th level, they had 10d6 for their sneak attack. So if they could auto crit on something when they missed, which wasn't going to happen a ton, especially since now they have advantage on everything. But back when they can crit their sneak attack damage, that was a massive thing. So they changed it in 5th edition to, well, you can treat it as a hit. You can just decide to hit instead of missing. But in anything else, you get a nat to 20, and you can just call it a 20. And that was because you couldn't get a critical success on a ability check or a saving throw in 5th edition. Critical successes or critical hits were only for attack rolls. When they changed the rules back in the last playtest, that made people very, very worried, specifically for things like this, because that meant that you would get the additional benefits. You would get the inspiration instantly, which is almost useless for a rogue because they get advantage on all their attack rolls. But and other really, really good things like a nat 20 is an automatic success, so you could just decide that no, I get to win. So yeah, the fact that they threw those away makes this a little bit less useful, and the fact that you can't crit on sneak attack anymore makes this probably one of the more boring abilities that exist in D&D, because there's just not much you're going to be able to do with this that's going to be fun or interesting. And it's a one and done ability. Now it's short or long rest, so it's not once per day. But I've mentioned this before. One and done abilities, not a fan of them. One and done effectively runs into what I call the elixir paradox. Basically, in Final Fantasy, there are these items called elixirs, and they show up, I believe, in almost every Final Fantasy. And the thing that's unique about the elixir is there's a limited number of them in the game. You can't buy them, you can't make them, you can't steal them. You can only find them in chests and other places. So there's a limited number. And they're really, really useful. They fully restore your hit points and fully restore your magic. And so they're really, really useful. So most players will save up their elixirs and will just never use them. It's like, well, what if I use it now, but then I'm in a more tough battle later on and I need it then and I don't want to use it now? And what always ends up happening is when you get to the end and you're fighting chaos, and you kill him on turn 4 because you have a ninja and a black belt that are just shredding him. as your white wizard and black wizard are just doing everything else. You end the game and you have like almost every single elixir still in your bag. It was so special that you only wanted to use it at a very specific time when it was the absolute best time to use it, and so you never used it. The same thing happens in D&D for one and done abilities. Everyone go, well, what if I need it later? Especially for something like this where it's a single roll. There are so many rolls that happen in D&D 5th edition and just in D&D in general. You are constantly rolling the dice. So it's like, well, I could make this attack hit, which would be really cool, but what if I need to save from, a really bad spell effect? Or what if, I need to make a check to, cast this spell or something like that? Like, I need this. I can't afford to use it now. And it just never gets used. Even just giving something 2 uses instead of 1. Like if you take shorter long rest out and turn it into you can use this 2 per long rest, players will use it more often than they will if you make it once per shorter long rest. Even if you take the short rest out and it's just 2 times per long rest, they will still use it more because 2 does not seem nearly as special and requiring of being saved than 1 does. So everything about this, I'm just, I don't like it. They've nerfed the rogue into boring. Moving on. 19th level, get a feat. 20th level, get an epic boon. That is the rogue. Let's look at that subclass. This is one of the faster ones I've done because the rogue is just that boring in this. There's no choices that they get in the entire thing. We'll go over that when I get to the end here. So, the thief. Again, the thief. I believe almost all of these are things that you get for the thief in 5th edition, and yeah. So let's just go over it real quick. It's pretty simple. First thing you get at 3rd level is fast hands. You have an additional option for the bonus action of your cunning action, with which you can do the following: take the search action. We've talked about it before by defining things by saying that okay, ability checks not only now all take an action, but they take a specific action, meant that by making that the default, you can now reward classes and subclasses by giving them exceptions. And in this case, the exception for the thief is they can take the search action as a bonus action instead of an action. And as a reminder, the search action, we're going to go down to it real quick so I don't say the wrong thing. Search. So you can use insight, medicine, perception, or survival is the search action. Interestingly enough, it's not the study action, which allows you to do investigation to like find traps or anything like that. No, it's a search action, which in combat, maybe an insight check might be useful. But for the most part, they're all wisdom-based. They're all wisdom-based things, like doing a search chest for medicine or survival. Like it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a rogue, especially since rogues generally didn't do dexterity wisdom. They would do dexterity intelligence, because intelligence is what you use to find traps, and then they could find the traps and then disarm them. And the Arcane Trickster was a really, really popular rogue class where they got some intelligence-based spellcasting. So that one's kind of weird. The other thing you get is you can do sleight of hand, make a dexterity sleight of hand to pick a lock or disarm a trap with thieves' tools, or to pick a pocket. Now, the interesting thing about this is they specifically say you have additional options for the bonus action of your cunning action. Not you can do these as a bonus action. They specifically call it a cunning action, and that is actually going to show up later in this that I find kind of interesting. Moving on. Second thing you get at 3rd level is called second story work. You get a climb speed equal to your speed, and when you take the jump action, you can make a dexterity check instead of a strength check. I've talked before, the changes that they make to the jump action in this are super cool, and it actually makes it a useful thing. Now, making a jump action becomes even more useful, because they can now make it with a dex check, which again, all rogues have to have is dexterity. So that means that they can do a lot of really, really cool things. It means they have more speed than they normally would be able to with a high dex check. I mean, that's just really, really good. So, yeah. Moving on. 6th level, they get it Supreme Sneak. You have advantage on every dexterity check stealth you make, provided you aren't wearing medium or heavy armor. Remember when I said rogues are just this close to being broken? Or once they get reliable talents, they not only can never roll below a 23 on their sneak checks, their stealth checks, but now they get advantage on it. So you are regularly going to see thief rogues rolling 30 plus stealth checks. It's just how it is. Moving on. 10th level, use magic device. This is another one that existed in 5th edition. But they do change it a little bit. So in 5th edition, you could you ignore all class, race, and level requirements on the use of magic items. So basically, if a magic item required you to be a ranger to attune to it, it didn't matter. Thieves can attune to anything. They can use any other thing. It's kind of cool. This changes things up a little bit. First thing is you can attune up to 4 magic items at once, which is an artificer defining feature. Now, again, artificer is an extra class. It was not part of the base classes. It took them a few years before they added the artificer. But it was one of the things that made the artificer special was they could attune more magic items than anyone. This is starting to lean into that a little bit. I guess if you're trying to make at least the thief rogue interesting by giving them interesting magic items instead of giving them interesting abilities, I guess that could be cool. And then the other thing you get is charges. Whenever you use a magic item property that expends charges, roll a d6. On a roll of 6, you use the property without expending the charges. That could theoretically be massively broken because there are things like the Staff of Swarming or a bunch of different magic items that let you cast really, really high-level magic without expending spell slots. But the way that they're built is they have a specific number of charges, and the really good spells you can only cast once. You get lucky, which you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting lucky, you can cast 2 meteor falls or something like that. Like really, really powerful things. And the final thing about it, you can use any spell scroll that bears a cantrip or a first level spell. Here's another weird thing. You don't, in 5th edition, cantrip scrolls don't exist because cantrips are not leveled spells. The other thing that's really, really weird is they call them cantrips here, and everywhere else in here they call them 0 level spells. So everything about this is really, really weird. Cantrips are not written down. They're instinctual magic that you can just do over and over again because you practice them so much. So cantrip spell scrolls are weird. Cantrip or first level scrolls, you can use any one of them, so that's kind of cool. You can also try to use any spell scroll that contains a high level spell, but you must first succeed on an intelligence check Arcana with a DC equal to 10 plus the spell's level. On a successful check, you cast the spell from the scroll, and you use this intelligence, and you use intelligence as your spellcasting ability for this casting. On a failed check, the scroll disintegrates. So this kind of goes back to the old like 3rd edition and 2nd edition version of the Rogue, where they had this ability to just use any magic item as if they were a wizard or something like that because they were rogues and things like that. The check failure is another one that, makes perfect sense. Now, again, with this, because this is an intelligence check Arcana, that means the lowest you can roll, because that is an ability check, the lowest you can roll is a 10 plus whatever your Arcana modifier is. So if you are trained in Arcana, that means by the time you get this at 10th level, you have a +4 to your intelligence modifier. By the time you get this at 10th level, that means you can cast any spell from a spell scroll up to level 14 without a roll, because you will always succeed. And there's no point in making the roll. Now, if you have, and that's just from being trained in Arcana, if you have 1 point in intelligence, if you have a 12 in intelligence, that brings it up to 15. A 14 in intelligence brings it up to 6 level spells you can cast without problem. And a 16 in intelligence, which is not difficult to get with a rogue, you can cast up to 7th level spells at level 10 without, or technically at level 11, without failing ever. So as much as, yes, they put this in here, all it takes is being trained in Arcana and reliable talent, and the only time you are rolling is on level 8 to 9 spells. And once your proficiency bonus gets to 5 and then to 6, you if you have a 6 in your proficiency bonus and a 3 as your intelligence modifier, you never have to roll to cast a spell. You always do. There is no chance of a failure, no matter what spell. So yeah, that is kind of weird, a little bit broken. Again, compared to the 5th edition version of it, there was they couldn't cast spells with this. Only arcane tricksters could, and they could only cast spells that were on their spell list from scrolls. So yeah, that's again, I understand where it's coming from, and it does make the thief a pretty interesting thing. It also means the thief can become very, very reliant on gold in 5th edition, because creating spells, even if you have casters that are going to make spell scrolls for you, which they can, and there are rules for that, it does cost money to do that, and buying spell scrolls is even more, is significantly more expensive. So it would heavily incentivize thieves to get as much money as possible, which is a very, very rogue thing to do. So in that kind of roundabout way, that kind of totally makes sense. But it does mean that thieves with the right amount of prep time and enough money, and one spellcaster that can cast 9th level spells, could, over a couple of weeks, make them 5 or 6 9th level spells, and the thief could outcast any spellcaster in the game, because they can cast more 9th level spells than anyone else in the game. And also, they can have more 9th level spells, quote unquote, prepared. Clerics that can prepare spells every single day, if they choose a different 9th level spell, turn it into a scroll, and give it to their rogue, that means theoretically their rogue could have access to every single 9th level spell that a cleric can cast, and could cast every single one of them in one combat. Like, that is a really, really big deal, and for me, that kind of breaks the class. And again, it doesn't take much. Just take Arcana, find a way to get proficiency in Arcana. You get an extra feat, so you can get proficiency in Arcana. And then by the time you actually can find 8th and 9th level scrolls, you will auto-succeed in them. So there's never a time when you are not going to be able to cast these massively powerful spells. And you still get to do all the thief stuff. You still get to disengage. You can hide every turn, come out just long enough to, rain fire down on the bad guys, and then go back and hide and never be hurt. Like, you are a more powerful spellcaster than any spellcaster in the game, because of everything you can do. So, yeah. Finally, 14th level. Getting a drink. Thief's Reflexes, and this is where that Cunning Action thing comes in. You can now take a second bonus action on your turn, provided it is the bonus action from Cunning Action. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. You gain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Thieves Reflexes was a thing. It was a 17th level ability, because you used to get 17th level subclass abilities in 5th edition. You can take 2 turns during the first round of any combat. that was you took your first turn at normal initiative and your second turn at your initiative -10. That was massively, massively cool and fun. And again, because rogues get a sneak attack, they could get an additional sneak attack on their turn. As long as they could get that reaction in between their two turns, that means the first round of combat, you theoretically could get 4 sneak attacks. Like, that was really cool. This one tones that down massively. Now you can just use an additional bonus action. Now, this would be really cool if you actually had a use for bonus actions. Now, because they can cast any spell that they want, as long as they have a scroll for it, if they can find some bonus action scroll spells, they can use their bonus action every turn to cast bonus action scroll spells while using their other bonus action to hide or whatever like that. So it basically means you have your bonus action and now your cunning action is its own thing, which I actually think is really cool. Like I said, the big problem I have with this is the scrolls thing is messed up as all shit. But the extra bonus action I think is really, really interesting. The big problem with it is the fact that there's no uses for your bonus action in 1 D&D right now. Like, it's such a limited number of things that you can do that getting a second bonus action doesn't really do you any good. If we were to use this in current 5th edition, where your offhand attack is a bonus action, well, then you could actually create a pretty interesting dual-wielding rogue where they still get their sneak attack once, but because they get 2 bonus actions, giving them a magic weapon that gets some sort of benefit on a hit, whether it's like a flame tongue and does extra damage or something like that, that could be really, really cool and interesting. Now, I don't know what to use your bonus action for. Yeah. So, final thoughts. Overall, this is the most boring version of the rogue I have ever seen. They nerfed the first half of the class. Sneak attacks can't crit. Thieves Cant is no longer exclusive to you. You can't get extra sneak attacks on a turn. Uncanny dodge you can only use on attack rolls. Like, they just limited everything they could sub-level 10. And then once you get above level 10, they give you an extra feat. Reliable talent is changed a little bit to be a little more useful. Subtle strike, you just get advantage on every thing. Slippery mind, you have proficiency in just about everything you're going to need for saving throws. Elusive, you can't get attack rolls against you, can't have advantage. And then stroke of luck, you just get to give yourself a nat 20 on something. So, like, it's weird. They really, really kind of penalized low-level rogues, but they massively boosted high-level rogues. And if I wonder, I've run high-level to the D&D. I've run high-level rogues, and they just get more powerful as they level up. It's not like I mentioned before, multi-classing is really, really popular in 5th edition for tier 2. From between the levels of 5 and 10, there are a ton of really interesting multi-classes that you can do that you can feel really, really powerful with. As soon as you hit tier 3, you start realizing how much a problem multi-classing is in 5th edition, because the benefits from having 2 different classes never outweigh the disadvantage of you don't get access to tier 3 abilities until much, much later, or possibly never. If you do a full half and half, both of your classes will only get up to level 10. You never get a level 11 or level 12 ability, and those are really, really powerful. So I'm wondering if perhaps people were complaining about rogues feeling underpowered, because, I mean, when you look at the stuff that they got in 5th edition after level 10, they really didn't get almost anything. Like, literally, for the rogue, they had reliable talent, they had blind sense, which was kind of a boring thing. Did they get rid of blind sense? I guess they did. Yeah, they give them advantage on all attack rolls. So blind sense was kind of cool. You got blind sense for 10. You got blind sight out for 10 feet. Basically, if you're able to hear, you're aware of the location of any hidden or invisible creatures within 10 feet of you. It wasn't blind sight, but it was effectively blind sight. Slippery mind wasn't all that great. It just gave you proficiency in wisdom saves. And then elusive and stroke of luck. Like I said, none of them were super, super fun. Like it was really fun getting cool stuff all the way up to level 7 for a rogue, because that's when you got evasion. That was super, super cool. And then from level 7 on, leveling up as a rogue was boring. There was nothing to do for it. So now they've added a bunch of cool things for the second half of the rogue, but in order to do that, they had to nerf all the things that makes the rogue cool that were still useful at high levels. Yeah, you weren't getting cool stuff as you leveled up in a rogue, but you still had cool things from the base version of the rogue. Yeah, it was almost all roguish archetype features, and yeah, they were getting something every every level, but yeah. And again, I guess the thief actually does give a fair amount, like the scrolls thing is specifically, and the use magic device specifically, that massively changes how you play your class. Whereas fast hands, yeah, sometimes you'll use that. Second story work, yeah, you'll use that a little bit. The jump action is actually really useful. Supreme sneak, it doesn't really change how you play the class. You're already, because you're going to have expertise in stealth. That's how rogues go. You're already making most of your checks. Now you're making all of your checks. It doesn't really change how you play the class. And then Thieves Reflex, again, it doesn't actually change how you play the class at all, because there's no uses for your bonus action. So yeah, I guess they wanted to make high-level rogues more interesting to level up, but in doing that, they nerfed the class massively. And me personally, I would not want to play a 1 D&D rogue. It looks really, really boring. Even the thief with the use magic device, it just looks really boring to me. I would much rather, like, again, my shadow monk can do almost everything almost everything a rogue can do. The big difference being my shadow monk didn't get expertise, but could cast Pass Without a Trace, which gave them a +10 to their stealth checks, meaning they didn't need expertise. And everything else, like, I had a lot more fun playing a rogue monk than I ever would have playing a rogue. And now with all these changes that they've added into 1 D&D, like, playing a rogue is less fun in 1 D&D than it was in 5th edition. And in 5th edition, it was a good class, but it was a relatively straightforward class until you started dealing with the subclass stuff. Like, the subclass is what made it, and the one subclass they have in here is boring. Like, everything about this just seems boring and not fun. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All the things are super, super important. In the comments down below, we have now seen everything in this playtest packet. I would like to know your guys' thoughts on the packet as a whole. Do you think, for the most part, it was good ideas? For the most part, it was bad ideas? A little bit of a mixed bag? Let me know in the comments down below. Me, personally, I think there were some interesting things in here, but for the most part, I wasn't thrilled with this playtest. The feats weren't great. The epic boon thing is dumb and is not going to survive. The changes to 2-weapon fighting was really, really interesting. A few of the other things I liked. The way that they fixed Hunter's Mark for the Ranger I thought was good, but they balanced all that out with just poor decisions and a lack of choice in this thing completely. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they do next. If they follow this pattern, I don't think any of these are going to make it to whatever the final printing of this is, because it's just, everything I like about 5th edition is not reflected in 1 D&D. And the few things I do like about it, Anyway, let me know your opinion in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all from me today. And I'll see you guys next time, all right? Bye-bye.